I sat on the porch of my house, watching the waves roll onto the sandy shore below. Tomorrow, my granddaughter Ashley is getting married, and I still can't shake the unpleasant feeling I've had since our last conversation. The ocean breeze ruffled my gray hair, but even its freshness couldn't carry away my troubled thoughts. The house had stood on a small cliff for 43 years. Roger and I bought it when he was 35 and I was 29. At the time, it was a modest two-bedroom house with a tiny kitchen, but over the years we expanded it, added a porch, and planted a garden. Roger built a white fence around the property with his own hands, and I planted roses that now bloomed every summer. After my husband's death 5 years ago, this house became more than just a roof over my head. It was my last connection to our life together. Every board on the porch remembered our evening tea parties. Every stone in the garden path was laid by his hands. Here I felt protected from the hustle and bustle of the big city, from annoying neighbors and endless problems that somehow always found their way to my doorstep. But in recent months, my peace has been disturbed. Ashley has been visiting me much more often than before. She used to come maybe once every 2 months, and only when she needed money for her latest whim. But since her engagement to Ethan, she had been showing up every weekend, each time finding a new reason to talk about my house. She first mentioned it in April, when we were sitting on this same porch drinking coffee. Ashley was looking at the ocean view and suddenly said, "Grandma, this house would be perfect for a young family. Can you imagine what a romantic honeymoon it would be here?" At the time, I thought she was just dreaming out loud. But a week later, she brought it up again, only more insistently. "You know, Ethan loves this place. He says he's never seen such a beautiful house by the sea. He also asked how much a property like this might cost." I felt the first stirrings of alarm, but said nothing. Ashley had always been a girl with a vivid imagination and a tendency to exaggerate. Maybe she was just sharing her fiancé's impressions. By May, the hints became more direct. Ashley started asking me how I planned to dispose of the house in the future, whether I had a will, and whether I was thinking of moving to the city, closer to my family. I answered all these questions evasively, but inside I was boiling with irritation. A 25-year-old girl was discussing my future as if I already had one foot in the grave. The height of her audacity came in June. Ashley arrived with a notebook and pen, supposedly to write down family recipes. But instead of asking about my grandmother's apple pie, she started inquiring about the technical details of the house: when the roof was replaced, the condition of the plumbing, whether there were any problems with the foundation. When I asked her why she needed this information, she replied innocently, "I'm just curious. Ethan works for a construction company, so I wanted to show him how sturdy our family home is. Our family home, as if it already belonged to her." In July, Ashley brought Ethan with her. The young man seemed pleasant to me, though a little shy. He sincerely admired the ocean view, praised the architecture of the house, and even offered to fix the squeaky step on the porch for free. But I noticed how carefully he examined each room, how professionally he assessed the quality of the finish. Ashley kept pushing him toward the windows, showing him the best views. "Can you imagine, honey," she said, "waking up every morning to the sound of the waves? And you could have such a romantic candlelit dinner on the porch." Ethan nodded and smiled, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. It seemed he didn't quite understand what his fiancée was getting at. And in August, Ashley finally dropped the mask. She arrived alone, without Ethan, and declared from the doorway, "Grandma, we need to have a serious talk. You understand that after the wedding, Ethan and I will need our own place, and renting an apartment in Radford is insanely expensive." I set a cup of tea in front of her and sat down opposite her, preparing to listen to yet another request for money. But what followed exceeded all my expectations. This house is too big for one person, Ashley continued, stirring the sugar. You're all alone here, and we're young. We need somewhere to start our family life. Dad says that sooner or later you'll want to move to the city, to be closer to doctors and shops. Your father says a lot of things, I replied dryly, but I'm the only one who makes decisions about my house. Ashley was taken aback for a second, but quickly regained her composure. Of course, Grandma. I don't mean you should just pack up and move out. I was thinking that you could give us the house as a wedding gift, as a family heirloom, and buy yourself a nice apartment in the center with an elevator and a concierge. I silently sipped my tea, thinking about what I had heard. So, they had already decided everything for me. The house would become their family heirloom, and I would get an apartment in the center. How generous of them to let me choose my own new home. And how much do you think this house is worth? I asked. Ashley perked up. Ethan did some research. Similar houses in this area sell for $800,000 or more. Can you imagine how much wealth is just sitting there unused? Unused. So, my life in this house, my memories, my peace of mind, none of that matters. The main thing is that the property is worth $800,000 and is sitting idle. Have you considered that I might not want to part with the house? I asked. Come on, Grandma. Ashley rolled her eyes. You're not gonna live here forever. And when you're gone, the house will go to Dad and then to me. So why wait? It's better to give it away now and enjoy our happiness. That's it. Ashley had already divided up my inheritance and was now explaining to me why I should be grateful for the opportunity to give it away while I was still alive. Her logic was ironclad. If the house was going to be hers someday anyway, why not get it right now? I stood up and began clearing the table. Ashley, I'll think about your proposal. Really? She beamed. Grandma, you're the best. You know, I was already imagining how we would celebrate New Year's here, how we would have a barbecue for Ethan's friends. I listened to her chatter and felt a cold rage growing inside me. Ashley already saw herself as the mistress of my house, already planning parties and rearranging furniture, and she thought of me only as an obstacle that needed to be delicately removed. Now, sitting on the porch in the evening light, I remembered all those conversations and realized that tomorrow at the wedding, Ashley would surely bring up the subject again, in front of all the guests, her parents, and her fiancé. She would pressure me with emotions, tears, and accusations of heartlessness. She would talk about how I was ruining the most important day of her life. The waves rolled steadily onto the shore below, and their sound was soothing. Whatever happens tomorrow, this house will remain mine, and it's nobody else's business, not Ashley's, not her parents', not her future husband's. Roger didn't build this house for strangers, and I'm not going to give it away to people who see me as nothing more than an obstacle to easy money. Kevin and Stephanie arrived on Friday evening, the day before the wedding. I heard the familiar sound of their silver sedan before the car appeared on the driveway. My son always drove fast and braked sharply, sending gravel flying in all directions, and I flinched every time, imagining the stones scratching the paint on the neighbors' cars. I didn't go out to meet them on the porch, as I had done before. Instead, I stayed in the living room with a book in my hands, pretending to be absorbed in reading. Let them come to the door and ring the bell, as guests should. In recent years, I've grown tired of them treating my house like a walk-through courtyard where they can show up unannounced and act like they own the place. Stephanie was the first to enter the house without waiting for me to open the door. She simply turned the handle and called out into the hallway. Nancy, we're here. I hope you've made us dinner. We're starving after our trip. Kevin followed her in, dragging two large suitcases. My 45-year-old son looked tired and irritated. His hair was already silver at the temples. Deep wrinkles had formed around his eyes, and his belly protruded treacherously from under his shirt. Working at an insurance company clearly wasn't good for his health, but it did provide his family with a stable middle-class income, which was enough for everything they needed, but not enough for everything they wanted. "Hi, Mom." He kissed me on the cheek and sank heavily into an armchair. The road was a nightmare, traffic jams every kilometer. Steph was nervous the whole way because of tomorrow's wedding. Meanwhile, Stephanie was already looking around the living room with a critical eye, as if looking for something that could be fixed or rearranged. My sister-in-law always considered herself an expert in housekeeping and interior design, even though their own home looked like a museum of bad taste. Artificial flowers everywhere, gilded frames, and furniture bought on installment. "Nancy, dear." Stephanie sat down on the edge of the sofa, trying not to wrinkle her white dress. "You haven't changed a bit, but maybe it's time to freshen up the interior a little. Those curtains have been hanging there for 10 years, and the wallpaper in the bedroom is completely faded." That's how she always started, with petty nitpicking and unsolicited advice. Stephanie was 42 years old, and for her entire adult life, she had dreamed of wealth and luxury, which she never achieved. When she married Kevin, she expected him to quickly climb the career ladder, but my son turned out to be too soft-hearted for big ambitions. So now Stephanie compensated for her unfulfilled dreams by criticizing other people's homes and constantly hinting that Kevin's family lived too modestly. "I'm fine with the curtains and wallpaper," I replied dryly. "And I wasn't going to cook dinner. I thought you would eat at a restaurant." "Mom, you're acting like a child." Kevin shook his head. "We told you we were coming today. Of course we were counting on a home-cooked dinner. We warned you." 2 days ago, Stephanie called and said they would be arriving on Friday and staying at my place because all the hotels were booked up due to the wedding season. No one asked if it was convenient for me to have guests or if I had plans for Friday evening. They simply presented me with a fait accompli, as they had been doing for many years. I got up from the couch and headed to the kitchen. "Okay, I'll make something. But next time, give me more than 2 days' notice." "Mom, don't be mad." Kevin followed me into the kitchen. "We're just all a little nervous about tomorrow." You know how emotional Ashley is. Oh, yes, I knew. Ashley had been emotional since childhood, but not in a good way. She couldn't handle disappointment, threw tantrums when things didn't go her way, and was used to getting what she wanted at any cost. Kevin and Stephanie always indulged her whims, thinking it was just childish spontaneity. When Ashley was 7, she wanted an expensive doll she saw in a toy store window. Kevin said he would give it to her for her birthday in 3 months, but Ashley didn't want to wait. She cried, kicked the floor, refused to eat or sleep. Stephanie held out for 2 days, then gave in and bought the doll. From then on, it became a rule. If Ashley wanted something badly, she got it immediately, regardless of the circumstances. At 12, she wanted an expensive bicycle that cost half of Kevin's monthly salary. They went into debt, but they bought it. At 16, she dreamed of a certain brand of car. They took out a loan. At 21, Ashley decided she wanted to attend a prestigious university in another state rather than a local college. Stephanie sold her gold jewelry to pay for the first semester, and then they turned to me for help. "Nancy, you understand how important it is to give a child a good education," Stephanie persuaded me at the time. "Ashley is such a talented girl. She deserves better." I gave them $10,000, not because I thought it was right to spend that kind of money on the whims of a 20-year-old girl, but because I didn't want to quarrel with my son. But Ashley didn't even thank me for the gift. She took it for granted, as if I were obligated to finance her whims. A year later, she came back for more money. This time, she needed a better car because her old one didn't suit her new status as a student at a prestigious university. I refused, and then Kevin himself came to me with a lecture on family solidarity. Mom, Ashley isn't just our daughter, she's your only granddaughter, he said, pacing around my living room. You don't want her to feel inferior to the other students, do you? Think about how this will affect her self-esteem. Self-esteem. Since childhood, Ashley had suffered from inflated self-esteem, not low self-esteem. She considered herself special, deserving of better than her parents could afford. And instead of explaining the realities of life to their daughter, Kevin and Stephanie tried to fulfill her every desire, even if it required unimaginable sacrifices. So I gave them another 5,000, but warned them that this was the last time. Kevin promised he wouldn't ask again, but 6 months later they were back at my doorstep. This time Ashley wanted to go on an internship in Europe, and she needed money for tickets and accommodation. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, Stephanie argued passionately. Imagine the connections she'll make there, how it will help her career. Career. Ashley changed majors every semester, and by the time she graduated, she still hadn't decided what she wanted to do. The internship in Europe was just an excuse for a free trip at her family's expense. I refused, and Stephanie was offended for a whole year. They didn't come for Thanksgiving, didn't wish me a happy birthday, and sent a standard Christmas card without a gift. But they found the money for the internship. Kevin took out a loan against the house, and Ashley spent 3 months in Paris, sending photos from expensive restaurants and fashionable boutiques. When she returned, she told everyone what a wonderful father she had, who spared no expense on his daughter's education. Now, as I chopped vegetables for a salad, I thought about all the times I had to bail my son out of financial trouble caused by Ashley's whims. Kevin never knew how to say no to his daughter, and Stephanie only encouraged his softness. They created a monster, a spoiled egoist who believes that the whole world is obliged to fulfill her desires. Mom, we need to have a serious talk. Kevin sat down at the kitchen table and folded his arms across his chest. Ashley is very upset about your misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. So now my refusal to give my granddaughter the house is called a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? I asked without turning to him. Come on, Mom. You know what I'm talking about. Ashley talked to you about the house. She's not asking for anything impossible, just asking for help to get a young family on its feet, get on their feet, at the expense of my $800,000 property. What touching concern for the younger generation. Kevin, this house is not for sale, and it's not a gift, I said firmly. And I don't understand why you think I should solve my granddaughter's housing problems. At that moment, Stephanie entered the kitchen. She had managed to change into a house dress and freshen up her makeup, but her expression remained dissatisfied. Nancy, dear, we don't want to pressure you, she began in that sweet voice she usually used with children and crazy people. But you have to understand the situation. Ashley is getting married tomorrow. She's stressed. She needs the support of her family. Support is one thing, but demanding a house is quite another, I replied, placing a plate of salad on the table. No one is demanding anything, Kevin protested. Ashley was just hoping you would help her out as a loving grandmother. You know how expensive rent is in Radford. Young people just can't afford it. Young people. Ethan works as a foreman and earns a decent salary. Ashley graduated from college and could find a decent job if she wanted to. But why bother when you can get a ready-made house worth almost $1 million? What's stopping them from renting an apartment in a neighboring town? I asked. Or buy a house with a mortgage like all normal people do? Stephanie rolled her eyes. Nancy, be realistic. With their income, the bank will give them a maximum loan of $200,000. And for that kind of money, You can't even buy a one-room apartment in a decent neighborhood. Then let them buy in a bad neighborhood, I replied calmly, or save up for a down payment, like Roger and I did. Mom, times have changed, Kevin sighed. Real estate costs a lot more than it did 40 years ago. It's very difficult for young people now. It's hard for young people. And it's easy for me at 77, so I have to solve their problems at the expense of my own home. Kevin, I remember very well how hard it was for us when we were young, I said, sitting down at the table opposite my son. Your father and I rented a room in someone else's house for 2 years, saving every penny for a down payment. Roger worked 2 jobs, and I did sewing on the side. No one gave us a ready-made home. But you have the opportunity to make life easier for your children, Stephanie interjected. Why keep such a big house when it could bring happiness to a young family? Bring happiness. As if happiness could be measured in square meters and ocean views. Stephanie, this house brings me happiness, I replied. My life is here. My memories are here. I'm not going to give it up for someone else's ambitions. What ambitions? Kevin snapped. Mom, we're talking about a roof over your granddaughter's head, about normal conditions for starting a family. Normal conditions. Is an $800,000 house normal conditions for starting a family? And what's not normal? A golden palace. Kevin, your daughter has spent 25 years getting used to having all her wishes granted immediately, I said wearily. But my house is not a toy you can give as a wedding gift. No one is talking about a toy. Stephanie slammed her palm on the table. We're talking about helping your family, about the fact that you could provide your loved ones with a decent life. A decent life. In Stephanie's understanding, a decent life is when all problems are solved at the expense of other people, when you don't have to worry about anything or fight for anything. Has anyone thought about me? I asked. Where will I live if I give the house to Ashley? Mom, don't exaggerate. Kevin waved his hand. With the money from selling this house, you can buy a great apartment in the city center, with an elevator, a concierge, close to the hospital and shops. They've already decided everything. I have to sell my house, give the money to my granddaughter to buy another home, and buy myself a small apartment in the center. How convenient. Everyone will be happy except me. What if I don't want to live in the city center? I asked. Mom, at your age, it's time to think about practicality, Stephanie said instructively. You're all alone here, the doctors are far away, and the roads freeze in winter. In the city, you'll have everything at your fingertips. Practicality. At 77, I should only think about practicality, proximity to hospitals and pharmacies. It is not appropriate to think about beauty, peace, or the familiar way of life. We ate in silence. Kevin and Stephanie exchanged glances, clearly disappointed with my reaction. They had hoped for a warmer reception to their proposals, for understanding and a willingness to make sacrifices for the sake of the family. But I was too old to pretend and feign enthusiasm about being robbed. After dinner, they went to the guest bedroom, and I stayed behind to wash the dishes. Through the thin walls, I could hear their muffled conversation. She's become completely stubborn, Stephanie said discontentedly. Does she really begrudge helping her own granddaughter? Mom has always been selfish, Kevin replied. Remember how she refused to give Ashley money for her internship? We had to take out a loan. She's selfish. A woman who doesn't want to give her house to strangers is selfish. And those who demand this house as a gift are caring relatives who think about the family's well-being. I finished washing the dishes and went out onto the porch to get some fresh air. Tomorrow was the wedding, and I was facing another round of this exhausting battle for my own home. On Saturday morning, I woke up to the sounds of bustle in the house. Kevin and Stephanie had been up for a long time, getting ready for the celebration. Stephanie was rushing between the bathroom and the bedroom, trying on different jewelry and redoing her hairstyle, while Kevin stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, trying to tie his tie. I could hear their voices through the walls as they discussed the plan for the day, the time of arrival at the banquet hall, and the guest list. The wedding was scheduled to begin at 2 p.m. at the Ocean View Country Club, a 20-minute drive from my house. Ashley had chosen the venue a year ago, falling in love with the panoramic windows and the terrace overlooking the sea. The banquet was quite expensive, $30,000 for 80 guests. But Kevin and Stephanie spared no expense for their only daughter's celebration. I took my time getting ready. I put on a simple dark blue dress that I had bought especially for the occasion, modest pearl earrings, a gift from Roger on our silver wedding anniversary, and comfortable low-heeled shoes. No bright colors, no flashy outfits. At 77, I had long since stopped trying to attract attention at other people's parties. Stephanie, on the other hand, chose a bright pink dress with sequins and high heels that clicked on the floor like castanets. Her hairstyle resembled a complex architectural structure, generously sprinkled with hairspray, and her makeup was so intense that her face looked like a mask. She clearly intended to outshine the bride, which was typical of her character. "Nancy, couldn't you wear something more festive?" Stephanie looked me over critically. "This is your granddaughter's wedding, and you look like you're going to a funeral service." I remained silent. Arguing with my daughter-in-law about my choice of clothing was beneath my dignity. Besides, I didn't care what she thought about my appearance. The main thing was that the dress was comfortable and didn't attract too much attention. We drove in 3 cars, Kevin and Stephanie in their sedan, and me in my old but reliable Toyota. I was fine with this arrangement. I didn't want to listen to their advice about how to behave at the wedding or their constant hints about the house. The Ocean View Country Club was located on a hill with a magnificent view of the ocean. It was a beautiful colonial-style building surrounded by manicured gardens and fountains. The parking lot was already full of cars. The guests had arrived right on time. I parked away from the entrance and sat in my car for a few minutes, watching the hustle and bustle. Young people in fancy suits and dresses walked in groups to the main entrance, laughing and taking pictures on the steps. They all looked happy and carefree, as guests at a wedding should. The ceremony took place in a large hall with high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. The chairs for the guests were decorated with white ribbons and fresh flowers, roses and lilies. Ethan stood at the altar in a black tuxedo, a little pale with excitement, but handsome and fit. Next to him stood his friends, the groomsmen, young men dressed in identical suits. I sat in the 3rd row, next to Kevin's distant relatives. In front of me sat Ethan's colleagues from the construction company, simple workers who clearly felt uncomfortable in such a solemn setting. They kept adjusting their ties and looking around, as if afraid of doing something wrong. When the wedding music started playing, everyone turned toward the entrance. First came the bridesmaids in matching lavender dresses, girls Ashley had gone to college with. They moved slowly and solemnly, like beauty pageant contestants. And then Ashley herself appeared. She looked truly beautiful in a snow-white dress with a long train and a lace veil. The dress cost $5,000. I knew because Stephanie never tired of repeating that figure to all her friends. Ashley walked slowly down the aisle arm in arm with Kevin, who beamed with pride. Camera flashes lit up her face, and she smiled that special smile of a bride who knows that right now she is the center of the universe. The ceremony went off without a hitch. The priest recited the standard words about love, fidelity, and support, and the bride and groom exchanged rings and vows. Ethan spoke quietly but sincerely, and Ashley responded with a clear voice that carried throughout the hall. When the priest declared them husband and wife, the guests applauded, and the newlyweds kissed under a shower of rose petals. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the banquet hall on the second floor. The atmosphere here was truly festive. The tables were covered with snow-white tablecloths, decorated with tall flower arrangements and silver candlesticks. Next to each place setting was a small box of chocolates, a gift from the newlyweds. Everything was decorated with impeccable taste and considerable expense. I was seated at a table with Ethan's relatives, his parents, grandmother, and cousins. They were simple, pleasant middle-class people who worked as teachers, mechanics, and nurses. They greeted me warmly and began to ask about the house by the sea, which, according to Ethan had described in the most enthusiastic terms. Mrs. Craig, Ethan said you have a stunning view of the ocean, said Ethan's mother, a pretty woman in her 50s. He dreams of living by the sea someday. He's loved water since he was a child. Yes, the view is really beautiful, I agreed, trying not to think about what plans my granddaughter had for that view. Is the plot large? Asked Ethan's father, a strong man with the tanned hands of a mechanic. Ethan said you could plant a vegetable garden or build a workshop there. A vegetable garden and a workshop. So they were already discussing how they would use my land after receiving it as a gift. Ashley approached our table. She had changed out of her formal wedding dress into a simpler but no less expensive cream-colored off-the-shoulder gown. She held a glass of champagne in her hands, her cheeks flushed with excitement and alcohol. Meet my beloved grandmother Nancy, she announced, hugging me around the shoulders. She lives in the most beautiful house in all of Radford. Ethan's relatives smiled and nodded. They clearly had no idea of the dramatic subtext hidden behind these words. Grandma, Ashley continued, her arm still around my shoulder, I've been dying to introduce you to everyone. Tell them about our family home, about how Grandpa built it. I felt the muscles in my face tense. Ashley was starting her game. First, she would present the house as a family heirloom. Then she would start a conversation about how important it is to pass on the legacy to the younger generation. It wasn't Grandpa who built the house, but the previous owners, I corrected dryly. Roger and I bought it in 1980. Yes, you did, Ashley agreed. But how much effort and love you put into it. Grandma planted the garden herself, planted all these roses, and Grandpa built the terrace and the gazebo. She spoke so warmly and sincerely that Ethan's relatives were moved. The groom's grandmother even shed a tear. What a beautiful story. I'm sure this house holds so many memories, so much love. Yes, Ashley nodded. That's exactly why I dream so much of keeping this house in our family, so that Ethan and I can raise our children there and continue our family traditions. There it was. The conversation had smoothly moved on to the main topic. Now she would pretend to be the guardian of family values, who dreams of continuing the family line within the walls of the family nest. Ashley, I don't think the guests are interested in hearing about real estate. I tried to stop her. Why not? Exclaimed Ethan's father. Family stories are always interesting, and Ethan has already told us so much about your house. He says he dreams of living there. Ethan, where's the groom himself? I looked around and saw him at the other end of the hall. He was standing at the bar with a group of friends, laughing and drinking. From the outside, he looked completely happy and carefree. Could he really not know about his wife's plans for my house? Ethan is such a dreamer, Ashley continued. He says he wants to wake up to the sound of the waves, work in a studio overlooking the ocean. I can imagine how we'll celebrate Christmas there, how our children will build sandcastles on the beach. Children. Now she was bringing up unborn children who supposedly needed a house by the sea for their proper development. Have you thought about moving closer to your children? Ethan's mother asked. Grandchildren are such a joy. It must be hard to live alone in a big house. I realized I had fallen into a trap. Ashley had deliberately brought me to Ethan's relatives' table so that they would unwittingly support her position. Now these lovely people, without realizing it, were pressuring me, convincing me that an elderly woman should make room for a young family. I'm comfortable in my house, I replied as calmly as possible, and I'm not going to move anywhere. But Grandma, Ashley made a sad face, you understand that we need somewhere to live, right? Rent in Radford is so expensive, and we can't afford to buy a house. There was the direct hint. Now Ethan's relatives had to understand that they were talking about transferring property to a young family. What if you take out a mortgage? Ethan's cousin suggested. There are lots of programs for young families now. With our income, they'll give us a loan for a maximum of $200,000. Ashley sighed. With that kind of money, you can only buy a trailer in a rough neighborhood. She was exaggerating, of course. With $200,000, you can buy a decent apartment or a small house in the suburbs, but not by the ocean, not with a panoramic view, not in the prestigious Radford neighborhood. But Grandma sits alone in her $800,000 house, Ashley added with a slight reproach in her voice. Of course, that's her right, but sometimes it seems unfair to me that the older generation holds on to real estate that could help the younger generation. Unfair. Now, I'm not just a selfish old woman, but also socially unjust. It turns out that wealthy retirees should give away their property to young people in need in order to redistribute wealth. Ashley, I said sternly, stop discussing my real estate in front of strangers. How are they strangers, Grandma? Ashley protested. They're my husband's family. Now we're all relatives. Relatives. Within 2 hours of meeting them, these people had already become my relatives, which meant they had the right to discuss my life plans and give me advice. Kevin approached our table with a glass of wine in his hand. He looked happy and relaxed. The alcohol and festive atmosphere were clearly having a beneficial effect on him. What are you talking about? He asked, sitting down next to Ashley. Grandma is talking about her house, her daughter replied. We're discussing family traditions. Oh, the house, Kevin nodded. Yes, it's a beautiful place. Ashley's father dreamed of a house by the sea like that for many years. It's a shame that prices are so high now. Young families can't afford it. And he joined the chorus of complainers. Now Ethan's relatives heard the opinion of the bride's father, who confirmed that the housing problem for newlyweds was indeed serious. Maybe you should consider living together, suggested Ethan's grandmother. When several generations live under one roof, it's economical and cozy. Living together. Me, Ashley, and Ethan in my house. The young couple would live on the first floor, and I would stay in a small room upstairs, grateful that I wasn't evicted altogether. That's an interesting idea. Ashley perked up. Right, Grandma? We could all live together, and I would help you with the housework and cook meals. Help with the housework. A girl who, in 25 years, hadn't even learned to wash her own dishes, was going to help me run the household. I can manage on my own, I replied, and I don't need roommates. The word roommates sounded harsher than I had intended. Ethan's relatives exchanged glances, sensing the tension. Ashley was offended and pouted. Grandma, why do you say that? We're family, not roommates. Family. When Ashley needs money or a place to stay, we're family. And when I want to be alone in my own home, I become a selfish person who doesn't think about the family's interests. At that moment, Ethan approached our table. He looked a little drunk and very happy with life. My dear ones, he announced, hugging Ashley, it's time to cut the cake. The photographer is waiting. Ashley instantly transformed, forgetting her resentment at my harshness. She took her husband by the arm and dragged him to the center of the hall, where a three-tiered wedding cake worth $1,000 stood on a special table. I remained at the table with Ethan's relatives, who were clearly puzzled by the conversation that had just taken place. They were simple people and did not understand all the intricacies of family intrigues surrounding expensive real estate. "Sorry for the awkward conversation," I said to them. "Ashley sometimes gets too carried away with planning for the future." They nodded understandingly, although there was a slight disappointment in their eyes. Perhaps they expected the bride's grandmother to be more enthusiastic about the young couple's family happiness. The cake cutting ceremony took place amid camera flashes and applause from the guests. Ashley and Ethan held the knife together, smiling and laughing as the cream smeared across their faces. They looked so young and happy that for a second I felt sorry for them. If it weren't for the house situation, I would have been genuinely happy for their marriage. But even now, at the most solemn moment of her wedding, Ashley did not forget her main goal. When the photographer asked her to make a toast, she raised a glass of champagne and said, "Thank you to everyone who came to share this happy day with us. Special thanks to our parents for their support and love. And a special thank you to my dear grandmother Nancy, who I hope will help us build a strong family in our hometown of Radford." The guests applauded, and I felt my cheeks burning. Ashley had just publicly announced my supposed willingness to help the young family. Now all the guests would think I was a stingy old woman if I refused to fulfill my granddaughter's expectations. After Ashley's toast, the music grew louder and the guests began to spread out across the hall, chatting and dancing. I hoped to sit quietly in a corner until the end of the banquet, but my granddaughter seemed to have other plans. Half an hour later, she reappeared next to me, this time accompanied by Ethan and several of the bride's friends. Her cheeks were even redder, and her eyes had an unhealthy gleam. Clearly, the champagne was having an effect. "Grandma," she said louder than the situation called for, "the girls and I were discussing our plans for the future. They're all so jealous that I have such a wonderful grandmother with a house by the sea." The bride's friends, three girls in identical lavender dresses, smiled and nodded. They looked slightly drunk and in the mood for frivolous chatter. Ashley had probably already told them about her plans to get the house as a gift. "Ashley said you might give them a house for their wedding," said one of the friends, a blonde with a baby face. "That's so romantic. Just like in the movies. Just like in the movies, where a kind grandmother happily gives her beloved granddaughter her hard-earned property, and the granddaughter gratefully accepts the gift and lives happily ever after." "Girls, you've misunderstood something," I began, but Ashley interrupted me. "Grandma is just being modest. She's always been like that. She doesn't like to brag about her generosity." Generosity. My refusal to part with my own house turned into modesty, and my hypothetical agreement turned into generosity. "Is the house really as beautiful as Ashley says?" asked another friend, a red-haired girl with curious eyes. "It's beautiful," I replied briefly, hoping that would end the conversation. But Ethan suddenly perked up. "Mrs. Craig, I wanted to say thank you so much for your offer. Ashley told me about the possibility of getting a house, and I'm just speechless. The offer. It turned out that my refusal had turned into an offer, and Ashley had already told her husband that it was a done deal." "Ethan," I said as calmly as I could, "I didn't make any offers to anyone." The young man looked confusedly at his wife, then at me. Anxiety appeared in his eyes. "But Ashley said, she said you agreed to give us a house for our wedding." "Ashley lied," I replied clearly and loudly. An awkward silence ensued. The bride's friends exchanged glances, not understanding what was going on. Ethan blushed and took a step back. Ashley stood frozen with her mouth open, clearly not expecting me to so directly refute her words. "Grandma," she finally managed, "what are you saying? We discussed this. You said you'd think about it. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it and decided that I'm keeping the house. But why? Ashley's voice was getting louder. What does it cost you to help your own granddaughter? You live alone in this huge house anyway. Guests at neighboring tables began to turn around to listen to our conversation. The music was still playing, but many had already turned their attention to the unfolding drama. Ashley, calm down, Ethan tried to intervene. We can discuss this later, in private. No, Ashley stamped her foot like a spoiled child. I want to settle this now. Grandma, you understand that I have nowhere to go, right? That Ethan and I need a place to live? Ashley, you have plenty of options, I replied, trying not to raise my voice. You can rent an apartment or get a mortgage, like all normal young families do. All normal families? Ashley jumped up from her chair. What, am I not normal? Am I a bad granddaughter? Why are you punishing me? Punishing me? My refusal to give her a house worth $800,000 turned into punishment for some mythical misdeeds. Ashley, I'm not punishing anyone, I said wearily. I'm just not going to give away my house. But it's a family heirloom. Ashley waved her arms, drawing even more attention. The house should be passed down from generation to generation. You can't just take it with you to the grave. To the grave. In front of all the guests, my granddaughter was hinting at my imminent death and the need to distribute my inheritance in advance. Then Kevin and Stephanie rushed over to our table. They had clearly noticed the beginning of a scandal and were trying to prevent a disaster. Ashley, dear, Stephanie hugged her daughter's shoulders. It's your wedding day. Don't get upset. How can I not get upset? Ashley was on the verge of hysterics. Grandma refuses to help me. She wants me to wander around rented rooms for the rest of my life. Wander around rented rooms. In Ashley's eyes, renting a normal apartment was equivalent to homelessness and a life of poverty. Mom, Kevin said quietly, leaning toward me, maybe we shouldn't discuss this right now. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Kevin, it's your daughter who's causing a public scene, not me, I replied. And if she wants to discuss my property in front of strangers, she can hear my answer. Strangers? Ashley flared up. They're my friends. They're my husband's family. How are they strangers? Ashley, please, Ethan pleaded. Let's not ruin the party. The party is already ruined, Ashley shouted, and now the whole room was looking at us. My own grandmother refuses to give me a wedding gift. She'd rather sit alone in her huge house than help her only granddaughter. Her only granddaughter. As if the number of grandchildren affects my obligations to them. Ashley, I said, rising from my chair, you're being disgusting. I'm not obligated to give you a house just because you want one. Disgusting? Ashley's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of rage, not grief. I'm disgusting, am I? What about you? You can see I need help. You know we don't have the money for our own place. You have jobs, hands, brains, I replied. Earn money, save money, buy a house, like everyone else does. But why, when we have a family home? Ashley sobbed, smearing mascara across her cheeks. Why struggle with loans and debts when you can just give me the house? Just give it to me. To give away the fruit of 40 years of work with my husband just like that, on a whim of a spoiled girl. The entire banquet hall was now silent, watching our family drama unfold. The waiters froze with trays in their hands. The musicians stopped playing. Even the children running between the tables fell silent and stared at us. Ashley, that's enough. Ethan tried to stop his wife, but she waved him away. No, it's not enough. I have a right to know why my grandmother hates me, why she doesn't want to help me. She hates me. Now, my refusal to give up the house has turned into hatred for her granddaughter. I don't hate you, Ashley, I said quietly. But I'm not giving up the house. So you do hate me, Ashley shouted. Otherwise, you wouldn't make me humiliate myself and beg. You wouldn't make me live in poverty. Poverty. Ethan's salary and Ashley's potential salary were enough to rent a decent apartment and save up for their own home. But for a girl who was used to having all her wishes granted immediately, any restriction seemed like poverty. Mom, please. Kevin put his hand on my shoulder. Say something. Ashley is upset. She doesn't understand. What should I say? I turned to my son. That you're willing to give up your house for your daughter's whim? It's not a whim, Ashley yelled. It's a necessity. I need somewhere to live with my husband. Then find a job and earn your own living, I replied harshly. Why should I work when I have a rich grandmother? Ashley wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Other grandmothers rejoice at their granddaughters' weddings and help young families, but mine sits on a pile of money and doesn't want to share. A bag of money. My house, which I bought, furnished, and loved for 43 years, had turned into a bag of money that I greedily possessed. The guests began to whisper among themselves. I heard snippets of phrases. How sad. Poor girl. It's really hard for young people these days. Public opinion was clearly in Ashley's favor. The young, beautiful bride asking her elderly grandmother for help looked like the victim, and I looked like a greedy old woman. Ashley, calm down. Stephanie tried to intervene again. We'll discuss everything at home, in a calm atmosphere. No. Ashley pushed her mother away. I want everyone to know what kind of grandmother I have. I want everyone to see how she treats her own family. She turned to the guests and announced loudly, Do you know what my grandmother said to me? That she doesn't care about my happiness, that she'd rather die alone in her house than help her granddaughter. Die alone. In front of all the guests, Ashley basically wished me dead. The room gasped. Even the guests who sympathized with the newlyweds realized that the bride had crossed all boundaries of decency. Ashley, Ethan exclaimed in shock. How can you say that? How else? Ashley sobbed. She doesn't love me. She doesn't love any of us. She cares more about some house than the happiness of her own family. I stood there silently, feeling my hands tremble. 43 years ago, I held newborn Ashley in my arms, rejoiced at her first words, bought her toys and sweets, and now this girl, whom I loved, was publicly cursing me for not wanting to give her my house. Mom, say something, Kevin begged. What can I say? I replied quietly. Your daughter has shown her true colors. I think everyone understands. I picked up my purse and headed for the exit. Behind me, I could hear Ashley sobbing, the soothing voices of relatives, and the discontented whispers of guests. Someone tried to stop me, but I didn't turn around. Ethan caught up with me at the exit. He looked confused and ashamed. Mrs. Craig, please forgive Ashley, he said quietly. She's very upset and can't control herself. Ethan, I replied, stopping, think carefully about who you married and decide if you want to spend your whole life with someone who thinks the whole world should do what she wants. The young man lowered his eyes and said nothing. Perhaps he was beginning to understand what kind of bride he had caught. I went out to the parking lot and got into my car. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't start the engine. Voices could be heard through the windows of the banquet hall. Relatives were trying to calm Ashley down and restore a normal atmosphere to the celebration. Finally, I managed to start the car and drive out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the windows of the banquet hall where my granddaughter's wedding was still going on, a wedding I had left to the sound of her curses. The drive home took 20 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. My hands were still shaking, my heart was beating too fast, and fragments of today's scandal were spinning in my head. Ashley's words, die alone, bag of money, "You don't love your family," rang in my ears like an alarm bell. I parked near my house and sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at the familiar windows, white shutters, and pink bushes under the porch. It was quiet and peaceful here, as always. No one was shouting, demanding, or cursing. Only the sound of the surf below and the cries of seagulls overhead. The sounds I had been waking up and falling asleep to for so many years. When I entered the house, I immediately took off my shoes and my festive dress. I put on the old robe I wore in the mornings and my soft slippers. I wanted to wash away all the festive fuss and return to my usual rhythm of life. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on and sat down at the table where Kevin and Stephanie had had breakfast that morning. It seemed like a whole week had passed since they tried to convince me to give a gift to my granddaughter. At the time, their requests seemed simply annoying. Now I understood that there was a whole strategy behind them, developed by the three of them. First, gentle pressure from the parents, then public blackmail at the wedding. Ashley told Ethan in advance about the alleged agreement and presented the matter to the guests as a done deal. And when I refused to play by their rules, there was a tantrum and an attempt to make me look like a greedy old woman in front of everyone present. The kettle boiled, and I brewed strong black tea, the very kind Roger loved. We had been buying it at a small shop on Radford's Main Street for 30 years. The shop owner, an old Chinese man named Chen, always smiled at us and asked how things were going at home by the sea. Roger, I wonder what he would have said about today's events. My husband was a gentleman who loved family celebrations and tried to avoid conflict, but at the same time, he never let anyone dictate his living conditions. When his brother tried to persuade us to sell the house and move to a city closer to our relatives, Roger politely but firmly refused. "Nancy," he said to me then, "this house is our life. We are happy here. We are comfortable here. Why trade happiness for convenience for others? Convenience for others. That's what they demanded of me today." Kevin and Stephanie wanted me to feel comfortable solving their daughter's financial problems. Ashley wanted me to feel comfortable providing her with a comfortable life. No one thought about whether it was convenient for me to leave the house where I had spent half my life. I got up and walked through the rooms, looking at the things that surrounded me every day. Here are the photos on the dresser in the living room. Our wedding 48 years ago, Kevin's birth, his first day of school, his graduation. And here were the later pictures. Roger with little Ashley in his arms, family dinners on the porch, the last Thanksgiving before my husband's death. In all these photos, Ashley looked happy and loved. Roger and I never denied her gifts, trips, or entertainment. When she was 10 and dreamed of a bicycle, her grandfather bought her the most expensive one in the store, pink, with a basket and a bell. When she was 16 and wanted to go on vacation to Florida with her friends, we gave her money for the trip, even though we were saving on our own vacation that year. Roger adored his granddaughter and called her his princess, but even he sometimes shook his head at her whims. "Nancy," he would say quietly to me when Ashley was once again throwing a tantrum because we had refused her request. "Kevin and Stephanie are spoiling her too much. She's growing up to be selfish," I would reassure him, saying that her personality would change with age, that her youthful maximalism would pass. But Roger was right. Ashley didn't change. She just learned to better hide her selfishness behind a mask of family feelings and fair demands. In the bedroom, I stopped in front of a photo of Roger and me, standing in front of our newly purchased house. We were in our late 20s then, looking young and full of hope. Roger has his arm around my waist, and I'm holding the keys to our first home. We didn't know then that this house would become the place where we would spend the best years of our lives. We didn't know that we would celebrate birthdays, Christmas, and New Year's here. We didn't know that we would watch the sun rise and set from the porch. We didn't know that I would grow roses in the garden and Roger would grow vegetables for our family table. This house has seen our arguments and reconciliations, illnesses and recoveries, joys and sorrows. When my mother died, I cried in this bedroom, and Roger hugged me and said that everything would be okay. When Kevin was born, we brought him here from the hospital and put him in the crib that Roger had built with his own hands for the first time. And when Roger himself died, I sat in this same bedroom and couldn't believe he was gone, that I would no longer hear his footsteps on the stairs, his voice from the kitchen, his laughter at the evening news. It was then that this house became for me not just a place to live, but a sanctuary where the memories of our life together live on. And now some spoiled girl is demanding that I give her this sanctuary as a wedding gift, so that strangers can move in, rearrange the furniture, throw away the photographs, and turn the house into a source of income or an object of prestige. I went back to the kitchen and finished my cold tea. The sun was setting outside the window, painting the ocean in shades of gold and pink. It was the time of day when Roger and I usually sat on the porch and discussed the past day. He talked about his work at the accounting firm, and I talked about household chores, neighbors, and plans for the weekend. Roger was never a very ambitious person. He didn't strive for wealth or fame, nor did he dream of reaching the pinnacle of his career. He was content with a stable job, a loving family, and a cozy home by the sea. Nancy, he would say, happiness isn't about how much money you have, it's about how you live each day. Each day. We lived each day to the fullest, not putting off joy for later, not chasing illusory goals. In the morning, coffee on the porch overlooking the ocean. During the day, work, household chores, meetings with friends. In the evening, candlelit dinner, books, conversations about this and that. Ashley will never understand this. For her, happiness is owning beautiful things, prestigious housing, the opportunity to show off to her friends. She is incapable of appreciating simple pleasures, the sound of the surf, the scent of roses in the garden, the tranquility of the evening hours. She wants ready-made luxuries, preferably expensive and conspicuous ones. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Kevin's number appeared on the display. I didn't answer. He was probably calling to persuade me to understand and forgive my daughter, to return to the discussion about the house. But I wasn't going to understand, forgive, or discuss anything. The phone rang several more times during the evening. Kevin, Stephanie, and unfamiliar numbers. The relatives must have heard about the scandal at the wedding and were now trying to find out the details. I didn't answer anyone. Towards nightfall, I went out onto the porch and sat down in my favorite rocking chair. The air was warm and fresh, smelling of salt and seaweed. In the distance, a lighthouse flashed, lighting the way for night ships. Everything was as usual, like thousands of other evenings spent in this house. But something had changed. After today, I could no longer just live peacefully and hope that family problems would resolve themselves. Ashley had shown her true colors, and Kevin and Stephanie had shown their willingness to support their daughter's every demand. They had declared war on me for my home, and I had to respond. Roger always said, Nancy, if people don't respect you, you have to make them respect you. Otherwise, they'll walk all over you for the rest of your life. My late husband was a gentle but not weak man. When it came to matters of principle, he knew how to be firm. Today, Ashley publicly humiliated me, trying to make me look like a greedy old woman in front of a room full of guests. She wished me to die alone because I don't want to give her my house. Things like that are not forgiven or forgotten. I got up from my chair and went into the house. In the desk drawer was the phone number of Daniel Harris, the lawyer who helped me with all the paperwork after Roger's death. An elderly, experienced man, a specialist in inheritance law. I'll call him tomorrow morning. In the same drawer were bank documents with the details of the account from which the wedding was to be paid for. Kevin had asked me to cover the cost of the reception, $30,000, supposedly as a gift to his granddaughter. I agreed, thinking it would be my contribution to the family celebration. Now I had other plans for that money. I took out the documents and put them on the table. Tomorrow would be Monday, the start of a new week, and the start of a new life, a life without illusions about the gratitude of relatives and family ties. Roger was right. If people don't respect you, you have to make them respect you. And I knew how to do that. Monday started early. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning, even though the alarm was set for 8. My sleep was restless. All night I dreamed of fragments of yesterday. Ashley's face contorted with rage, the condemning glances of the wedding guests. But in the morning, after drinking coffee on the porch to the familiar cries of seagulls, I felt clarity in my head and firmness in my decisions. At 9 in the morning, I called Daniel Harris's law office. The secretary said that the lawyer could see me at 11. He had a free slot between meetings. I made an appointment and began to get ready to go. I put on a strict dark blue suit that I had bought for business meetings when Roger was still alive, comfortable low-heeled shoes, and took my old but high-quality leather bag. I wanted to look serious and respectable, a woman who makes thoughtful decisions rather than acting on emotion. Harris's office was located in the center of Radford, in an old brick building next to the city library. Daniel Harris was a third-generation lawyer. His grandfather and father had also practiced law in this city. He was in his late 60s, gray-haired, slightly overweight, with kind eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Craig," he said, rising from his desk when the secretary showed me into his office. "What a pleasant surprise. How are you? How's your health?" "My health is fine, Mr. Harris," I replied, sitting down in a chair across from his desk. "But I'm having some family problems." "Oh, those are the most difficult cases," sighed the lawyer, taking my folder out of his desk drawer. "Family disputes are more painful than any other. What's the problem?" I told him about the events of the last few months, Ashley's demands, the pressure from Kevin and Stephanie, yesterday's scandal at the wedding. Harris listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions and making notes in his notebook. "I understand," he said when I finished. "It's an unpleasant situation. What do you want to do about it?" "I want to change the will," I replied firmly. "I want to exclude my son and his family from it, completely." Harris raised his eyebrows. "Mrs. Craig, that's a serious decision. Maybe you should think about it some more. Family quarrels tend to settle down over time." "Mr. Harris," I said firmly, "yesterday my granddaughter publicly wished me dead because I refused to give her my house in front of a room full of guests. Do you think that can be forgiven and forgotten?" The lawyer shook his head. "No, of course not. Things like that really cross the line. Okay, let's draw up a new will. But I must warn you, this is a drastic decision. It can be revoked later, but—" "There will be no revocation," I interrupted him. "I've thought it through carefully." "Then tell me, to whom do you want to bequeath your property?" I took a piece of paper out of my bag where I had written down my decisions the day before. The house and land to the Ocean Coast Protection Fund, bank accounts and securities to the local animal shelter, the car and personal belongings to my neighbor Mrs. Wilson, who has been helping me with my shopping for many years. Harris wrote it down, occasionally glancing at me over his glasses. "What about Kevin? Won't you leave him even a symbolic amount?" "Nothing. If he thinks he has the right to dispose of my property during my lifetime, then he won't get an inheritance." "Mrs. Craig," the lawyer put down his pen, "I understand your feelings, but as someone with experience, I have to say that decisions like this sometimes lead to lawsuits from relatives. They may try to contest the will." Let them try, I replied calmly. I have witnesses to their behavior, all the guests at yesterday's wedding. I think the court will be interested to hear how my family treats me. Harris shrugged and took out the will forms. All right, as a client, you have the right to dispose of your property as you see fit. Let's start drawing up the documents. It took about an hour to draw up the will. Harris carefully wrote out all the wording, indicated the exact addresses of the beneficiary organizations, and checked the accuracy of the legal terms. When the document was ready, I read it again and signed it. The lawyer certified the signature with his seal and put the will in a safe. That's it, he said, taking off his glasses and wiping them. The new will takes effect immediately, and the old one is revoked. Thank you, Mr. Harris. How much do I owe you? $500 for drawing up the will. But, Mrs. Craig, allow me to offer some advice from someone who has seen a lot of family drama. If your relatives try to apologize and mend fences, consider reconciliation. Revenge rarely brings peace of mind. Mr. Harris, I replied, rising from my chair, I am not seeking revenge. I simply do not want my property to go to people who consider me a burden. Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt a strange sense of relief. The future of my house had now been decided. It would go to people who would take care of the ocean front, not sell it to the first buyer, and the money would help homeless animals instead of sponsoring the whims of a spoiled girl. But my plans didn't end there. The next item on the agenda was the wedding and the $30,000 I had agreed to spend on the reception. I came home and took the contract with the Ocean View Banquet Hall out of my desk. Kevin had brought it to me a month ago, explaining that the organizers required a prepayment from the event sponsor. Since the young couple didn't have that kind of money, and Kevin and Stephanie didn't have any spare cash either, they asked me to be the guarantor. Mom, it's just a formality, Kevin assured me at the time. They just need the signature of someone who guarantees payment. You don't mind helping your granddaughter on such an important day, do you? I didn't mind at the time. I thought it was really just a formality, my contribution to a family celebration. I signed the contract and gave my bank account details for automatic payment. But now the situation has changed. Ashley publicly insulted me, showing that she considers me a source of money rather than a loving grandmother. So let her deal with her own financial obligations. I found the phone number of the banquet hall manager, Jessica Anderson, in the contract. The number was listed for emergency contact. I dialed it. Ocean View Banquet Hall, Jessica speaking, answered a young woman's voice. Hello, this is Nancy Craig. I am the guarantor for the payment of Ashley Coleman's wedding banquet, which took place on Saturday. Oh, yes, Mrs. Craig. It was a wonderful event, and all the guests were satisfied. True, there was a little awkwardness at the end, but it didn't affect the overall impression. Awkwardness. So, the banquet hall staff also witnessed a family scandal. Jessica, I'm calling about the payment, I said. I want to cancel the automatic debit from my account. Cancel? The girl was surprised. But Mrs. Craig, the banquet has already taken place. The services have been provided. According to the contract, payment must be made within 3 business days after the event. Jessica, please read the contract carefully. I was the guarantor of payment, but not the sole payer. The document contains a clause stating that in the event of the guarantor's refusal, the main responsibility lies with the event's customers, Mr. and Mrs. Coleman. There was a pause. I could hear the girl turning the pages. Yes, there is such a clause, she agreed uncertainly. But usually guarantors don't refuse to pay. This could create problems. My granddaughter created problems by causing a scandal at her own wedding, I replied. I withdraw my consent to pay for the banquet. Collect the money from the newlyweds. Mrs. Craig, they may not have the funds. $30,000 is a lot of money for a young family. That's not my problem. If they don't have the money, then they shouldn't have ordered such an expensive banquet. But what are we going to do? Jessica's voice was tinged with panic. We have to pay the suppliers, the staff, contact the event's clients, or their parents, Kevin and Stephanie Coleman. Let them deal with their daughter's financial problems. Mrs. Craig, maybe we could arrange an installment plan or partial payment? Jessica, I'm not obligated to pay for other people's entertainment, especially after these people publicly insulted me. Ask the Colemans for the money. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. I imagined the commotion that would now ensue in the banquet hall. The managers would call Kevin, demanding explanations and immediate payment, and Kevin would have to explain to his wife and daughter why the luxurious wedding had suddenly turned into a financial problem. $30,000 is almost a third of Kevin's annual income. He doesn't have that kind of cash, and it won't be easy to get a loan in 3 days. He'll have to borrow from friends, sell some of his possessions, or negotiate an installment plan. In any case, it will be an expensive pleasure. 20 minutes later, the phone rang. Kevin's number appeared on the display. I didn't answer. Then Stephanie called. I ignored that too. Then some unknown number, probably from the banquet hall. By evening, my cell phone was dead from endless calls. I turned it off and put it in my desk drawer. I also unplugged the home phone. Let them figure it out themselves. I had already played my part in this story. I had dinner on the veranda, watching the sunset over the ocean. The air was warm, the roses in the garden were fragrant, and the waves gently lapped against the shore below. Everything was peaceful and beautiful, as always in this house. No one was shouting, demanding, or accusing me of greed and insensitivity. Over the past day, I had radically changed my life. I had deprived my son of his inheritance, left my granddaughter without money for her wedding, and severed family ties that had been built over decades. By the standards of public morality, I had acted cruelly, but by my own standards, I had acted fairly. Roger always said, treat people the way they treat you. If they see you only as a source of money, don't give them money. If they don't respect your feelings, don't take their feelings into account. I finished my evening tea and went inside. Tomorrow I will turn my phone back on and listen to everything my relatives want to say to me. But I will not change my decision. The line has been drawn, the bridge has been burned. Now I have to live with the consequences of my choice. But for some reason, that didn't scare me. On the contrary, for the first time in many years, I felt truly free. On Tuesday morning, I turned on my phone and immediately saw 23 missed calls. Most were from Kevin and Stephanie, a few from unknown numbers, and one from Ashley. There were 8 voicemails, but I decided not to listen to them yet. First, I wanted to have a quiet breakfast on the porch and get ready for the upcoming conversations. Less than 10 minutes later, the phone rang. Kevin. Mom, finally. My son's voice sounded tense. Why didn't you answer? We were worried sick. I turned off my phone, I replied calmly, sipping my coffee. I wanted to spend the evening in peace. Mom, what's going on? I got a call from the banquet hall. They say you're refusing to pay for the wedding. Is this some kind of mistake? A mistake. Of course, my son hoped it was a misunderstanding that could be quickly resolved. No mistake, Kevin. I did withdraw my consent to pay for the banquet. But why? Mom, we had an agreement. You yourself agreed to be the guarantor. We agreed before your daughter publicly called me a greedy old woman and wished me to die alone. There was a pause. Kevin was apparently thinking about how to respond to this argument. Mom, Ashley was upset. She wasn't in control of herself. Weddings are stressful, especially for the bride. Stress. So publicly insulting her grandmother can be chalked up to wedding stress. Kevin, your daughter showed her true feelings toward me. I'm not going to finance those who consider me an obstacle to their happiness. Mom, But $30,000. We don't have that kind of money. What are we going to do now? I don't know. Maybe you should have thought about that before ordering a banquet for that amount. Mom, be reasonable. Kevin's voice took on a pleading tone. Ashley did something stupid, but she's young and passionate. Are you really going to punish her for the rest of her life because of one unfortunate conversation? One unfortunate conversation, months of pressure, demands to give up the house, a public scandal at the wedding. All of that boiled down to one unfortunate conversation. Kevin, I said firmly, I'm not punishing Ashley. I just don't want to pay for the celebration of someone who considers me the enemy. She doesn't consider you an enemy. She's just upset that you don't want to help her. Help? Giving away a house worth $800,000 is helping? Mom, what does the house have to do with it? We're talking about a wedding. The wedding and the house are connected, Kevin. Ashley made a scene because of the house. Now she has to deal with the consequences. Kevin fell silent. I could hear him breathing heavily into the phone. Okay, he finally said. What if Ashley apologizes? Officially, in front of witnesses? Nothing will change. Mom, you can't be so cruel. Cruel. A woman who doesn't want to give away a house and pay for someone else's wedding is cruel, and those who demand a house and money are simply in need of help. Kevin, I'm not cruel. I just don't want to sponsor your whims anymore. Whims? Mom, we're talking about a roof over the head of a young family. We're talking about an $800,000 house that your daughter wants as a gift. That's not a roof over their heads. That's luxury. But where will they live? They'll rent an apartment, like millions of young families do. Or they'll buy something with a mortgage. They'll learn to live within their means. The phone went silent. Kevin apparently realized that persuasion wasn't working and decided to change tactics. Okay, Mom, what about the banquet? We really don't have anywhere to get $30,000. Ask the bank for a loan, or ask your friends for a loan, or arrange an installment plan with the banquet hall. Mom, do you understand that this will put us in a very difficult position? Our reputation will suffer, our relationships with people, reputation. Now Kevin was appealing to considerations of prestige. Kevin, when your daughter publicly insulted me at the wedding, did you think about my reputation? Mom, but you're an adult. You can understand and forgive. Understand what? That your family considers me a source of money? That no one cares about my feelings? Mom, we love you. Strange love, Kevin. The kind that requires you to give up your house and shut up when you're insulted. The conversation had reached an impasse. Kevin tried for a few more minutes to find arguments that would make me change my mind, but I remained adamant. Finally, he gave up. Okay, Mom, but know this, you're destroying our family. I'm not destroying anything, Kevin. I've just stopped letting you use me. He hung up without saying goodbye. Half an hour later, Stephanie called. Her approach was different. No pleas or persuasion, just an attempt to make me feel guilty. Nancy, how could you? She began right away. Leaving the newlyweds in this situation. Ashley cried all night yesterday. Cried all night. So Ashley already understood the financial consequences of her behavior at the wedding. Stephanie, I'm not ashamed. The ones who should be ashamed are those who raised such a selfish girl. What selfish girl? Ashley just wanted help from her family. Ashley wanted an $800,000 house for free, and when I refused, she wished me dead. She was upset. Any girl would be upset in that situation. Any well-bred girl would have found other ways to express her upset. Nancy, stop nitpicking. This is important. Young people need help, and you're turning your back on them. I'm not turning my back. I just don't feel obligated to solve their problems at my own expense. At your own expense? Stephanie's voice became shrill. Nancy, you have $1 million house. Are you too stingy to help your only granddaughter? $1 million. Now the price of my house had gone up another 200,000 in their eyes. Stephanie, the price of the house has nothing to do with it. I'm not obligated to give my property to anyone. But you won't live forever. The house will go to Kevin anyway, and then to Ashley. Stephanie, I said very calmly, I went to the lawyer yesterday and changed my will. The house will go to an environmental fund, and the money will go to an animal shelter. There was a dead silence. I could hear Stephanie breathing heavily on the other end of the line. What? What did you say? She finally managed to say. Kevin and his family are out of the will, completely. You can't do that, Stephanie screamed. We're family. We have rights. You have no rights to my property, and we ceased to be a family on Saturday when your daughter publicly insulted me. Nancy, you're crazy, Stephanie yelled. Depriving your own son of his inheritance because of a childish prank. A childish prank. A public death wish has turned into a childish prank. Stephanie, your daughter is 25 years old. It's time she took responsibility for her words as an adult. We'll take you to court. We'll contest the will. We'll prove you're out of your mind. Go ahead. Just keep in mind that I have witnesses to how your family treats me. All the wedding guests heard Ashley's words. But you have to pay for the banquet. You signed the contract. I was the guarantor, not the sole payer. According to the contract, the main responsibility lies with the customers, Ashley and Ethan. They don't have that kind of money. Then they shouldn't have ordered a $30,000 banquet. Nancy, you understand. If they don't pay, their credit history will be ruined. They won't be able to get a mortgage. Stephanie, that's their problem. Let your princess learn to take responsibility for her actions. Stephanie yelled into the phone for another 5 minutes, accusing me of cruelty, heartlessness, and destroying her family. I listened calmly, without interrupting. When she ran out of steam, I said, Stephanie, if that's all, I'm hanging up. I need to tend to the garden. The garden? She couldn't believe her ears. We're having a family crisis, and you're thinking about gardening? You're having a crisis, Stephanie, and I'm having a normal Tuesday. I tuned out and turned off the sound on my phone. I didn't want to listen to any more reproaches and threats today. I did indeed spend the rest of the day in the garden, replanting roses and watering the vegetable beds. The work was calming and restored a sense of normalcy to my life. The earth, the plants, the sun, all of this was real and understandable, unlike family intrigues and emotional blackmail. In the evening, while having dinner on the porch, I reflected on the day that had passed. Kevin and Stephanie tried to find arguments that would make me change my mind. They appealed to family ties, maternal love, and guilt. But they didn't say the most important thing, that they regretted what had happened, that they understood my position, that they were ready to change their attitude. The only thing that mattered to them was money, for the banquet, for the house, for their daughter's comfortable life. My feelings, my rights, my dignity didn't matter. I was a source of funding, and when that source dried up, they simply tried to turn it back on by pushing the right buttons. But I was no longer going to play the role of an ATM for my own family. Roger always said, Nancy, respect must be earned, not extorted. My relatives did not deserve my respect. That meant they didn't deserve my money either. The phone remained silent until evening. Apparently, Kevin and Stephanie realized that a direct assault would not work and were preparing a new strategy. But whatever it was, my decision would remain unchanged. I had drawn a line that I would not cross. 3 weeks have passed since that memorable Monday, when I changed my will and refused to pay for the wedding banquet. 3 weeks of absolute peace in my house by the sea. No calls asking for money, no visits hinting at the house, no lectures on family duty and moral obligations to the younger generation. I returned to my usual rhythm of life. morning coffee on the veranda to the cries of seagulls, working in the garden, reading on the terrace in the afternoon, evening tea with a view of the sunset over the ocean. Simple joys that used to be constantly interrupted by family problems and demands for financial assistance. The roses in the garden bloomed especially profusely this year. Every morning I cut fresh buds for bouquets in the house, enjoying their fragrance and beauty. Roger always said that roses sense the mood of the garden's owner. Apparently, my liberation from family stress had a beneficial effect on the flowers. Information about what was happening in Kevin's family reached me through my neighbor, Mrs. Wilson. This sweet 80-year-old lady had an amazing ability to find out all the news in Radford without leaving her own home. Her network of informants included the mailman, shop clerks, the librarian, and even the window cleaner who served half the town. "Dear Nancy," she told me last week, showing up with a basket of freshly baked cookies, "your son is completely overwhelmed with these wedding debts. Mary from the bank said he took out a loan against his house at a pretty high interest rate, a loan secured by the house. So Kevin had to find $30,000 to pay for the banquet after all. I wonder how he felt when he signed the loan documents, knowing that for the next few years he would be giving up a significant portion of his salary for one night of celebration for his daughter. And how are the newlyweds?" I asked, offering Mrs. Wilson some tea. "Oh, that's a whole other story." My neighbor perked up. "They rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a one-room apartment in an old building. Jane from the real estate agency said they looked at options for 3 days, complaining all the time about the prices and conditions. The girl cried right in the office, saying she couldn't live in such conditions. A one-room apartment on the outskirts. What a tragedy for a girl who dreamed of an $800,000 house with an ocean view. Ashley probably wakes up every morning in a cramped room and remembers the spacious bedroom with panoramic windows she could have had if she had behaved like a human being at her own wedding." "What about Ethan?" I asked. "How is he coping with married life?" Mrs. Wilson lowered her voice as if sharing a state secret. "Bob from the construction company said the guy is completely depressed. He used to be cheerful and sociable, but now he's gloomy and doesn't go to corporate parties. They say there are constant arguments at home. His wife blames him for not being able to provide her with a decent standard of living. Constant arguments. Ashley apparently decided that if she couldn't get money from her grandmother, she could demand it from her husband. Poor Ethan probably has to listen to lectures every day about what a luxurious life he should provide her and what a loser he is for not being able to buy a house by the sea." "What about Ashley's parents?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Kevin and Stephanie aren't in a better position either," sighed Mrs. Wilson. "Loan payments eat up half his salary. Stephanie had to get a job. She's now a saleswoman in a women's clothing boutique. Can you imagine how hard that was for her? She always thought she was too good for that kind of work. Stephanie, a saleswoman in a boutique. A woman who despised ordinary people and dreamed of high social status now stood behind the counter herself and smiled at customers. Irony of fate or just desserts? Everyone judges for themselves." "Darling," Mrs. Wilson leaned across the table toward me. "Don't you regret your decisions? They are your family, your blood relatives, after all." Blood relatives. How often do people hide behind these words when they want to get something from more successful family members? "No," I replied honestly. "I don't regret it. For the first time in many years, I am living peacefully, without constant requests for money and accusations of being insufficiently generous. But your granddaughter, Ashley, was always your favorite." "She was," I agreed, until I realized that I was just a source of funding for her. People love you not for your money, but in spite of your lack of it. Mrs. Wilson nodded understandingly. She herself had experienced a similar situation with her nephews, who only appeared in her life when they needed financial help. Another source of information was Mr. Chen from the tea shop. When I bought my usual black tea from him, he mentioned that he had seen Ashley in the store across the street. "She has changed a lot, Mrs. Craig," he said in his accented English. "She used to always smile, laugh, and buy expensive teas. Now she looks tired and chooses the cheapest products." Cheap products. It turns out that when there is no grandmother's money for pocket expenses, you have to save even on food. I wonder if Ashley is learning to cook for herself, or if she still expects someone else to solve her everyday problems. "She asked about you," Mr. Chen added. "She wanted to know if you still buy tea from my shop." "And what did you say?" "I said I don't discuss my customers' business with strangers." Strangers. With one sentence, the wise old man defined Ashley's new status in my life. Not a granddaughter, not a close relative, but a stranger. The days passed in a calm rhythm of household chores and small pleasures. I read books that I had put off for months because of family problems, watched movies, and did needlework. I reconnected with friends I had rarely seen in recent years. All my time had been taken up with Kevin's financial crises and Ashley's whims. I especially enjoyed evenings on the porch with a cup of tea and a book in my hands. No one called asking for a loan. No one came with plans to sell my house. No one lectured me about family obligations. Just the sound of the surf, the cries of the seagulls, and the scent of roses from the garden. The sounds and smells that made this house a home. Sometimes I thought about Roger and what he would say about my decisions. My late husband did not like conflict and always tried to find a compromise in family disputes, but he also valued fairness and couldn't stand it when someone tried to take advantage of his kindness. "Nancy," he once said to me, "you should help those who really need help, not those who just don't want to work for themselves." Ashley and Ethan didn't need help. They needed ready-made solutions to their problems. The difference is fundamental. Yesterday, I received a letter from Harris's lawyer. He informed me that someone had been inquiring about my will, trying to find out how it could be contested. Harris politely refused to provide any information to third parties, but warned that legal action was quite possible. Let them try. I have witnesses to my relative's behavior at the wedding, a room full of people who saw Ashley's true colors. There is documentary evidence of attempts to coerce me into selling the house. There are medical reports on my health and legal capacity. And most importantly, I have the clear conscience of a person who has stopped allowing herself to be taken advantage of. This morning, sitting on the porch with my morning coffee, I watched the fishing boats on the horizon. The fishermen went out to sea every day, worked honestly, and earned their living by their own labor. They did not demand that someone give them ready-made boats or pay for fuel for their engines. They understood a simple truth. If you want something, you have to work for it. My relatives do not understand this truth. They still hope to find a way to make me change my mind, return the money, and restore the status quo. But I am no longer the person who meekly fulfills other people's financial demands for fear of being labeled greedy. I am a woman who has the right to dispose of her own life and property, and I exercise that right to the fullest.